There's an old Afghan saying that declares that the people of Afghanistan will only ever be at peace with each other when they have someone else to fight with. Exaggeration or sad truth? Seen from above, from the northern steppe or the mountains, the impression is one of great natural beauty, rather than of a human disaster of epic proportions. This is the view from the ground. Deserts, plains and mountain peaks disappear and are replaced by the sight of hordes of human beings wandering within the cities and displaced camps. If trees and plants have survived, it's often because they provide camouflage for guns and armored vehicles. It's just as well that there are kites. Poor children all over the world love kites, and Afghan children are no exception. The kites draw their gaze upward. Unfortunately, when the wind drops, they come tumbling back to earth, to where the dinner pot stands, empty. What are you supposed to eat? How are you supposed to survive in a country that's been at war for the past 15 years? Where over 1.5 million people have been killed? Where the limbless victims of landmines linger around street corners? Where 8 to 9 million people, about half the entire population, have been forced to abandon their homes and seek refuge from the fighting wherever they can.
Even before the war, the situation of children and women in the country was extremely bad, very high infant mortality rates, very low literacy levels and so on. The war has completely destroyed the economic and social infrastructure. It has created enormous problems, including many, many mines, which just add to the difficulties of getting back to normal. Currently, the situation of women and children is far worse than it ever has been. Rural health services are declining. Even those that were supported by non-governmental organizations during the war, many of them are finishing because of the lack of donor support. So in many rural areas of Afghanistan, there are essentially no health services for women and children, and very limited education services. Even social services in urban areas are under a very great strain, and their standard is extremely poor. At the moment in Afghanistan, as I mentioned, one of the problems is mines. A recent estimate shows that something like 3,000 adults a year are killed by mines, and something like 2,000 to 3,000 children are killed or injured. But we have to look at those figures, appalling as they are, against the background of what else is happening. More than 100 times as many children die from poverty, malnutrition and disease as are killed or injured by mines. More than twice as many women die in childbirth as actually adults are killed by mines. So terrible as the mine figures are, they are very small compared with the overall death rate caused simply by the poverty and malnutrition and disease.
Looking at it from the ground, Afghanistan appears to be a forgotten nation. Neighboring countries encourage refugees to return. There are already caravans of families fleeing the fighting in nearby Tajikistan. What was once a nomadic tradition is now a desperate attempt to survive. In the capital, Kabul, the refugees dodge bombs and bullets and flee the city, many heading east towards Jalalabad, which was once famous for its fruit trees and olive groves. But the war and the Mujahideen have reduced the area to a sandy wasteland. Now the desert plays unhospitable host to a sea of tents and washed-up human lives, many of which have reached the end of their tether. Others escape north to Mazar-e-Sharif. Troops clash and guns roar, while ordinary people run in the opposite direction. Only the rubble remains. Everything turns to stone, and people speak using the past tense. The wind has turned these military lines near Herat into sand dunes. Villages that seemed destined to last forever are now piles of rubble. This was where Dr. Katibi treated his patients, once upon a time.
This is a Karwan rest house.
All his stories begin with the words, "This was." This was a halfway house. There were stables for horses, garages for cars. And then, one day, the Soviets appeared down the highway, bringing war with them. There are those who've returned, like this former patient of Dr. Katibi.
And you have children? میگه تو بچه‌ام داری؟
بچه‌ها مال خدا بچه‌ام دارم.
Yes, she has.
مال خدا 6 تا صغیر پیار به ما بمون بیجاگاه
She says I have six children.
بیشتر سخته آنه. اصلا 6 بیجی صبح میرن تا به حال آنه این روزگار مال سختی اشته چیزیه آنه. آنه دست پنجه نزد سختی اشته چیزیه.
It is difficult, you know, from the early 6
One family, father, mother and 6 children, have put together a few stones with a roof on top to sleep under. Hospitality is still sacred in this part of the world, and it's hard to refuse a cup of tea and anecdotes straight from a survivor's heart.
شما میگه آمدیم اینجا که خونه خور آباد
بله یعنی خونه خور آباد کردیم آمدیم.
Yes, he came to reconstruct his house and he came with this. For days, for a month, always bombs. میگه برای روزا روزا ماهای بمبار شده.
یعنی به شو میومد بمبار میشد.
During the night also bombarded.
یعنی به روز چیز میومدن.
بگو روزا زمینه زندگی میکنه اصلا غذا نمیتونستیم بریم بالا خود چهار پنج ما گوش نبودیم از زمینی.
She says that I was under the
What have been the effects of this endless war? According to United Nations statistics, every Afghan family has lost someone in the fighting. 500 to 700,000 Afghan women have been widowed, and untold numbers of children have been orphaned. There are 105 of them in this UNICEF-sponsored center in Herat. They'd really like to be playing football, but there isn't one. So they study, learn about personal hygiene, weave carpets, and sing.
وطنم جانی منی وطنم جان وطنم کشور من جانی منی.
The song starts by describing the reconstruction of Afghanistan. It tells of the houses that have to be rebuilt, the work to be done, the gardens that will bloom again. The song pauses for a moment to meditate on the ruins of Afghanistan, before concluding on a hopeful note, and the children's desire to see their nation rise out of the ashes of destruction. The TV crew's small contribution is in the form of a football. Happiness is a football match and a box of tangerines. What are these children doing in a country divided among 11 political alliances, each with its own Kalashnikov-toting militias? What kind of future awaits them in a land that echoes with the sound of gunfire, where home is a temporary tent city or displaced squatter camp? Sarshai camp near Jalalabad. The adults work, especially the women and old people, and theirs are the hardest tasks. cooking and scavenging for a few dry twigs to make a fire. But the children carry their share of the workload. There are 72,000 children under the age of 12 in this camp alone. Fortunately, they spend at least 2 hours a day at school. School being understood as a piece of canvas spread out over the dirt, and a hodgepodge of syllables and sentences repeated under the critical gaze of a teacher who's paid her monthly salary with food rations. A child's meditation on the war in Afghanistan goes like this. Another displaced camp, another story. This is the Kamaz camp near Mazar-e Sharif in the northern steppe. 28,000 people eke out an existence here. They fled Kabul in 1992. They've been living under tents for 2 years. A few of them have built something a bit more solid. Others have created their living space underground. Asib is a celebrity here. He knows 2 songs. The first is dedicated to one of the Prophet's relations. The second is called Little Dances. After his performance, Asib takes off the special outfit that the women make for what's here considered to be the exorbitant amount of $1 an outfit. He reappears in his everyday rags. Making it through to tomorrow is hard work. There's the cart to be pushed, goods to be sold. Roll up your sleeves and plunge your hands into the cow dung, which is a useful and valuable commodity. The dried out pies can be used to light fires, and the smell keeps insects at bay. Afghanistan, land of mountains and natural beauty, victim of negligence, wallowing in the trash left behind by the violence. UNICEF, along with other international aid organizations, is doing what it can to help. Thanks to them, the street cleaners are back, and wells are being dug to provide fresh water. To think that once the rivers of this land supplied it with more water than it could use. There was once abundant clean water, and there were unbroken traditions. Butskashi has been played using the sand-stuffed carcass of a sheep for over 1,000 years. Today it's played only by bored soldiers who toss a few coins to a couple of shabby riders. Past glory and present poverty. Whatever happened to the Chapandosa, the once proud knights in their brightly colored tunics? They were mujahideen and ended up with nothing. Their only alternative, to take up arms and fight. In Afghanistan, guns mean power. Representatives of the international aid organizations know that only too well. Delivering food and medical supplies to those who need them most is fraught with difficulties. And on the political front, what happens inside the palaces of power in Afghanistan? Agreements are signed, ceasefires are discussed, and the fighting goes on. Not one road leading into Kabul is intact. The capital, until recently, was divided among the militias and continues to be the target of frequent attacks.
The situation in Afghanistan is very complicated. It is necessary to have a peace process which can achieve peace and settle the country. But in the meantime, there is a big need for rehabilitation to try to build up what has been destroyed by the war, to try to provide health services, to get educational services working again. And support for these social infrastructure can really help towards the peace process. The whole of Afghanistan is not in war at the moment. Many areas are peaceful and trying to get back to normal. Something like 2.5 million refugees have returned in recent years from Pakistan and from Iran and are trying to get their lives back to normality. These people need assistance. They are getting some help from the United Nations and other NGOs. They need more help. But that process in itself will speed up the peace process and will help to achieve peace throughout the country.
Afghan children continue to hope for some signs of a future that will have to be built from scratch.